These true crime stories remained unsolved for several decades, but the truth eventually came out. The cases were solved, and some had unexpected conclusions. Number 5. When Mervyn Sinclair disappeared in 1958, his family would never see him again. What happened to him was a creepy mystery that many didn't believe would ever be solved. But in 2021, the mystery was solved in the most unexpected way. Mervyn was 23 years old in 1958. He was a private with Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry and was stationed at Camp Wainwright in Denwood, Alberta at the time of the disappearance. He was a tough young man who had been taught to fight by his father at a young age. They were an Indigenous family, and his father had wanted him to be able to look after himself. The training would come in helpful for Mervyn when that spring a commanding officer made advances towards him. Mervyn declined, and they settled the disagreement with a fight, and Mervyn came out on top. Shortly afterwards, he was allowed to join his family for the Easter weekend. He was worried about returning back to base as he expected he would be disciplined for the fight. But at the end of the weekend, he said goodbye to his family and began to hitchhike back to the base. May 15, 1958 was the last time his family ever saw him. When he didn't return to the base, he was declared AWOL, but there didn't seem to be much of a search by the military to find him. Mervyn's family put up posters and handwritten messages on bulletin boards in search of him. As the years went by, they feared the worst. They didn't know if an accident or foul play might have taken his life on the road, or if something worse than Mervyn imagined had happened on the base. But it seemed likely he was no longer alive. His family kept up the search for answers, with his brother continuing the campaign until he too passed away. It wasn't long after that they made a shocking discovery. The answer to the mystery came from a woman named Ghislaine Davidson. Ghislaine was a young woman raised by her mother and stepfather. Her birth father, a man named William Baca, had left when she was about 1 year old. He was very secretive about his life, and he had told Ghislaine's mother little about it. He claimed to be a Native American from Oklahoma, and his parents' names were Nora and Victor. In 1980, he passed away in a car incident. As an adult, Ghislaine started to do some research into her father's side of the family, and she first discovered that she had a younger half-brother who knew a bit more about their dad. William had been in his life up until his accident. He shared photos that he had and stories of William bringing out a guitar on camping trips. But things really became strange when Ghislaine submitted DNA to an ancestry website, hoping to connect with more of her father's family. She discovered a cousin whose grandparents' names were Nora and Victor Sinclair. After getting in touch with the Sinclairs, they discovered William Baca was actually Mervyn. He had decided to start a new life. Many details about Mervyn's new life wouldn't be uncovered, but his family were just happy to know what happened and to solve the biggest mystery in their lives. Number 4. After more than 35 years, the family and friends of Marie-Therese Bonfanti finally got an answer as to what happened to her on a spring evening in 1986. The young mother of two vanished without a trace while delivering newspapers, and only a confession from the man responsible could finally crack the case. Marie-Therese was 25 years old in 1986. She had 2 young children, including a 6-month-old. On May 22nd, she left the 6-month-old at childcare, then started her rounds delivering newspapers, which she did to make ends meet. The rounds took her around the small French alpine town of Pontcharra, an area she knew well in broad daylight. When her husband returned home from work that evening, he found her missing. She also hadn't picked up their child from childcare. He went to search for Marie-Therese and found the first clue in an unsettling mystery. Her car was parked outside of a block of apartments. The keys were still in the ignition, and her handbag was in the car. Naturally, Marie-Therese's husband asked around to see if anybody had seen or heard from her. Yves Chastain was the one that he spoke to. Chastain owned the block of apartments and seemed very suspicious. Marie-Therese was reported missing, and Chastain became a focus point for the police. He had a history of violence, especially towards women, and the police also thought that he seemed suspicious. At one point, he was arrested, but they could find no evidence that he had anything to do with the disappearance, and he was released. The true crime story went cold, but Marie-Therese's family continued to search for answers. Chastain stayed a prime suspect to them, but they didn't rule anything out. Finally, in 2020, they believed they'd found enough evidence for police to take another look at the case. They compiled all the work together in a file and turned it over to police. Chastain was once again arrested. Because he had already spent time in custody, there was only a short amount of time that he could be held for before being charged or released. But it wouldn't take many questions before he confessed to taking Marie-Therese's life. He had come home after going shopping to find her car parked in a way that he didn't like. They got into an argument. Marie-Therese had decided to go into his house to demand an apology, and it was there that he took her life. He then hid her body in a nearby forest. Marie-Therese's body still hasn't been found, but Chastain is now cooperating with police, and they hope to find her remains soon. Another twist in the story came when police revealed Marie-Therese may not have been the only person who Chastain took the life of, and they're now investigating to see if he may have been involved in more unsolved cases. Number 3. Gloria Corzine vanished sometime in 1981. She was long believed to have passed away, and her family knew who their number one suspect was. So when her husband, William Corzine, told police that he had taken her life, the most unexpected part of the story was that he had finally come forward. Gloria had married her husband in 1967. It wasn't a happy marriage. Over the next 14 years, police were called countless times due to domestic assault cases. At one point, Corzine threatened to take Gloria's life, and he was put in a mental institution for a time, but later returned to live with her. She was taken to a hospital multiple times, but every time she had the charges against Corzine dropped. Still, she feared for her life, and a few months before she was last seen in March of 1981, she gave her father a letter, only to be opened if anything happened to her. She was last seen leaving her place of work in Pennsylvania on March 6th. Gloria presumably went home to her husband and was never seen again. For months afterwards, her family tried to get in touch with her, but Corzine made excuses for why Gloria couldn't come to the phone. He went to her place of work and said that she was leaving due to poor health and asked for her last paycheck to be sent to him. When police were contacted in July, he said she was staying with an aunt in Florida. But no such person existed, and he wasn't questioned any further. Years later, he would file for divorce on grounds of desertion. He testified in court that Gloria had abandoned him, but his story often changed. Sometimes he claimed to have seen her multiple times over the years, and in another story, he gave her his car in 1987 and never saw her again. But in 2019, police reopened the case and began questioning Corzine again. Finally, he confessed to taking her life. According to him, she had fired a weapon at him during an argument. The bullet had missed, but they had fought over the weapon. Corzine had won the fight and used it to take Gloria's life. He then took her body out on a boat and left it in the Delaware River. He was sentenced to between 7.5 and 15 years in prison, and will likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. Number 2. When John Norton came home from work on December 17, 1985, he discovered a terrible crime had taken place. At the bottom of the stairs, he found his wife's body. He tried CPR, but she was already gone when paramedics arrived. Karen Norton had been just 23 years old. She wanted to be a nutritionist and worked at JCPenney. 3 years earlier, she and John had married. They had been high school sweethearts, and John was welcomed into the family. They lived opposite of Karen's mother in Maryland, and from the outside appeared to be very much in love. When police arrived at the Norton home, they found the place had been ransacked. There was evidence someone had broken into the house, and they believed Karen had interrupted a robbery. A search for clues began. No DNA evidence could be found at the scene of the crime, and there were no witnesses that could give police anything to go on. The case then went cold. John moved in with Karen's mother for a year, cashing in her life insurance policy of $100,000, then drifting away from the family. Some of Karen's sisters were suspicious of John. Karen had confided in them that they'd been having marriage problems and that she was considering divorce. But police and insurance investigators had not believed John was involved. John went on to remarry twice and have a daughter. In 2017, he ended up in the hospital and was in a serious condition. According to his family, he dropped hints that he had something to do with the passing of his first wife. But when police arrived, he said he had already told them everything that there was to tell. Now police had reopened the case though. Looking at the crime scene photos, they now believed that the scenes had been staged. There was also a witness who saw John's truck at the house long before he had called 911. John was arrested and charged for taking Karen's life. It was not what investigators had expected when they began looking into the case, and some of Karen's family who had trusted him were also shocked. But investigators were still worried that they didn't have enough evidence, so they gave John a plea deal. He had pleaded guilty to taking Karen's life and was sentenced to 4 years in prison. He had already served 2 while awaiting trial. This was a sentence that many of Karen's friends and family were not happy with, but the case was finally solved. Number 1. Terry and Roxanne Wood spent the evening of February 20th, 1987, at a bowling alley in Niles Township, Michigan. They had driven to the alley separately, and after having a good time, they drove home separately as well. When Terry got in the car to follow Roxanne home, he never imagined that that night would end with a scary mystery. Terry got home a little while after Roxanne. He found her lifeless. Someone had broken into the house and attacked Roxanne. DNA evidence was found at the scene of the crime, but there was little that could be done with it at the time. The case soon went cold and would remain unsolved for decades. Local police continued to keep in touch with Roxanne's family, but without new leads, there was no way that the case could progress. In 2001, the case was reopened by cold case investigators, but the new eyes didn't lead to anything happening with the case. Again in 2020, it was reopened, this time with the help of university students working on the cold case project to help find loose ends that had not been followed up on. But it was new DNA technology that led police to an answer. The answer was 67-year-old Patrick Wayne Gillum. Gillum already had a criminal history. In 1980, he had broken into a house and attacked a woman. He'd been sentenced to 14 years in prison, but was released in just 6 months before Roxanne was attacked. Investigators followed him and were able to obtain his DNA from discarded cigarettes. The DNA matched that found at the scene of the crime. He pleaded no contest after being arrested for the crime, and will now spend the rest of his life behind bars. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.